had a bent to get into that sort of the music and the recording, and in those days, of course, it was so much easier because you just virtually knocked on the door of what was NZBS at that stage, and said I wouldn't mind working for radio. And, oh yeah, no, when can you start? You know, I was assigned to 2ZB as a technical trainee, but I just loved it when we got jazz bands in or orchestras or something to record, and I used to try and soak up as much information I could as to how to go about it, how to place mics, add reverb. This memo came around to say, we're starting a new television service, anybody interested? And we thought, oh, because I mean, nobody knew much about television, and so we all assembled at Waring Taylor Street to start WNTV1, and we all were put there about a month or two before we went on air. And I mean, I can remember boxes of equipment arriving. Nobody knew what on earth it was all about. What is a telecine chain? Never heard of that, you know. So we're all looking at manuals and putting together the equipment to try and get things on the air. They decided that because I was the youngest, it'd probably be best for me to just stay with sound. So that was my duty at WNTV1 on the opening night of transmission, which was the 1st of July 1961. Auckland had already been on the air prior to that. Oh, it was great. I mean, we're only on the air from 7 till 9 or something, and it was quite funny because the public sort of thought it was like going out to the movies. They've been so used to going to the pictures, you know. And in the lounge at Waring Taylor Street, I remember them coming off the street and sitting on couches, sitting down there for an evening of television. I was always keen to travel. I desperately would like to have got to the United States, but of course you couldn't work there. I couldn't get a visa to work, so I thought, oh, Canada's the next best thing. So I did a little bit of a tour around the United States first, and then ended up in Toronto and got to hear about a soap opera that was going to be starting at a private production house called Moment of Truth for the NBC network. That was another thing. They said, well, what are your skills? And I said, well, I can do sound, camera, lights. And they just didn't believe me. They said, you know, this is Kiwi coming over here, so he's operated all this equipment. So anyway, they had a vacancy as the sound mixer for it. So I worked on that for almost 2 years. There was an Australian bloke who was he was the sort of managing the operation, and he sort of knew the way we worked down there, so I thought, oh yeah, no, that's fair enough. I started to get a little bit frustrated. I'd look through the control room wall to what the directors were doing, and I thought, oh my God, I could do better than that. Some of them just making fools of themselves. They didn't understand where the cameras were. They were crossing them and doing all sorts of. So the opportunity, they just put it. They were looking for more directors and put out saying anybody interested in applying for a director's course. And I thought, oh yeah, that's where I should make my change now. I've sort of done enough of the operational, technical side. I'd now like to get into production. That was a real heady days of television. I mean, there was so much going on, and at that stage they were sort of grabbing anybody who had skills just to get them. So they would say, well, anybody got ideas? What could we do for an entertainment show? And because I was in the entertainment department because of my skills with music, so I would say things like, well, you know, I'd quite like to do a jazz program. How about, yeah, okay, right, yeah, what do you need? How much money do you need? Just Jazz was first, then Knock on Jazz, then Jazz Scene. They weren't high audience raters, but they were a fantastic program to do because there's a lot of very, very good musicians around, and of course they weren't being exposed anywhere else. Then they said, well, what else would you like to do? And having been involved with ballroom dancing for a little while, my wife was one of the champion Latin American dancers, and so I said, what about a dancing show? So there's nothing new in the world. I mean, Dancing with the Stars is a different concept, but Top Dance was the one that I developed. It was actually a competition between cities, because I could see there was always a lot of competition with dances between Auckland, Wellington, Nelson, Christchurch. Avalon, of course, the big studio there, was just used 7 days a week, and they'd strike a set and rig and relight overnight and be ready for the next day. The Top Town thing was going at that stage. That took up weekends, and my summers for about 4 years, you know, running around the country. But that, again, was fantastic because that was getting out in the field and getting out to the community in the provincial towns. Turn up in Greymouth and get about 4,000 people there. OSH laws you wouldn't be able to do it anymore, because I mean it was really we really did press the boundaries a lot with people doing silly things and slipping off and into pools and what have you. I was always felt very uncomfortable at the way the whole thing was being set up right from the start. It was being managed by somebody, and they had all these crazy ideas of presenters in spacesuits, and rather than sort of a proper meal for people to eat, just little fancy nibbles and things, plenty of booze flying around, of course. So I was there directing the cameras, and of course it just turned to custard, really. I mean, it was just, people didn't know what was happening, and half the time they weren't allowed to go up and actually speak when they accept their awards. They say the decision was made that certain awards would just be presented without speaking, because of timing, really, which got everybody upset and annoyed, and it was starting to get totally out of control. And of course, when you're directing cameras, there's not a lot you can do, because you're no B-van miles away from it, and the production people who had set it all up were nowhere to be found. This is your life. The whole key to that is getting close to the person's partner, wife, husband, the closest person to them. Once you get them on board and they're happy to go along and get the information for you without passing it on. And invariably it worked. They played the game quite well, but everything that was done in the way of research had to be done very quietly and secretively. I mean, it's like going on stage. You go on stage, you get one chance at it, you know, you don't get another, you can't do retakes or anything. And when it goes well, there's always little whoopses occasionally, but when you come off air, you get a great sense of satisfaction, and you can go home and forget about it, because you don't have to do any post-production. It's gone, finished. If you've made mistakes, it's there, you know. So I think they realised that if they wanted something covered live, it had to be well organised, and to me that's the key to it. For any live, you've got to absolutely understand what the event is, know what's going to happen and where, and so you can place the cameras in the right place, do any briefing of the crew so they know what to expect. You might have 7 or 8 cameras within your preview monitors, and a lot of people get fixated on what was going on air, like the line monitor. But for me, looking at the line monitor is history. I mean, that's there. What you've got to look at, what's coming up next, and prepare somebody, like, say, camera 3, you know, the Governor-General's car is going to be arriving from your left-hand side, and so he's ready for it. So you're always scanning ahead. There's nothing worse than something happening, and then the viewers can't see it or hear it. They get very frustrated. The biggest one would be Tomb of the Unknown Warrior. That was just amazing. I mean, it was 3 hours on the air. This was when the Unknown Warrior was brought back from France. That also had a helicopter covering the event, but I had other directors, of course, because we had several OB vans for that. But so I was sort of coordinating it from the main OB van at St Paul's Cathedral. But that very meaningful, and that was, and the whole country got glued to that one, and it got released on a DVD as well. So that would be the biggest one I've done. It's a wonderful show because it's got quite a very loyal audience, and it's one of the few that's going around into provincial areas. Even though it's recording hymns in churches, anyone can come along into a congregation and sing hymns. The number of fantastic choral groups in this country, gosh, we never got around them already, and a lot of them coming out of the schools. You know, the college singers, they have a big sing, of course, for all the colleges get entered into, and the New Zealand Secondary Students Choir, the youth choir and things, it just blow you away. They're world standard, you know, so it's such a pleasure to be able to record them. Communication is the big thing. If you can communicate and be sensitive to people, how to get the best out of people, I think that's probably one of my skills. I mean, it's the old story. You always, you know, a little bit of praise goes a lot further than a slap on the backside. So there are times when you do have to sort of come down quite heavy, and particularly if you know that person has the skills to do things properly. You just have to say, look, I'm sorry, that's not good enough, you know. and often if you're directing in a calm way and suddenly jump on something like that, it really does wake everybody up, because they realise that, hey, we do have to set standards, you know.
And just partly because, you know, you're not normally sort of...
Yeah, I'm not a yeller. No, I don't do. A lot of the directors, particularly through that era, were, and they thought that the way to succeed was to shout and yell at people. But if you can bring them along with you without that sort of thing.